Right. So good day, class. So today we're going to discuss about community centers. As you can see, our last tape is about a clubhouse. Then the closest thing to a clubhouse is a community center. So this is from the Metric Handbook on Planning and Design Data. Okay, so the key points here is that there is a need for a community facility in most areas. Okay, I think this is true, especially here in the Philippines. Each barangays or each subdivision really need an area for a common community facility. Okay, then existing centers are often inadequate. This is also true here in the Philippines, because much of the existing community centers here, they don't really cater much to the um, development of the community, as well as the different uh, people living in the surrounding areas. So let's look into a briefing on the nature of community buildings. So they offer a variety of functions. Okay. So as stated here, so they are used for meetings. Okay. They are used for childcare. Of course, you need day nursery or preschool playgroup, children's activities, concerts and plays, dances, parties and receptions. Okay. Some community centers, you could held weddings there, just like some of the clubhouses here in our city. Then exhibitions also. Then sporting and leisure activities. So that's why in our design problem, we have sporting facilities. Then of course, adult education. Okay, so the client, such as a church or a local authority, may have its own specific requirements, but the financial viability of community facilities usually depends on letting out to other organizations. At the briefing and planning stage, it is wise to consider activities which could or should be accommodated. Okay, so that's why, class, in the clubhouse design, we added some new facilities. If you could remember, we had a spa there, we had a swimming pool. So those are additional facilities. Okay, so for the space requirement and arrangement, so it's written here that meetings can range from committee meetings of half a dozen people to public meetings with an audience of 100 or a couple of hundred. So this range is anticipated, and accommodations will include one or two smaller meeting rooms as well as the main hall. So this is ideal that you have meeting rooms that are small, and you also have larger meeting rooms. Of course, you could also make it an option that your meeting rooms or function halls could be subdivided into smaller units depending on the need. So I think you could observe that in some of the restaurants here in the city, where in their function rooms, they could subdivide the spaces into smaller uh, segments. Okay? Then childcare and children's activities invariably require storage for furniture and equipment. If scouts use the facilities on a regular basis, for example, they are likely to need permanent storage for camping equipment, such as tents and poles, and cooking as well as games equipment. Of course, this would really also depend on the context of the community center. Then, some indoor sporting activities such as badminton require generous space provision. So, I guess the class, here in the Philippines, the most um, popular sport would be basketball. So I think it's ideal you have a basketball court. It should base that on the design standards. Of course, then if you look into the higher end subdivisions, you could place also a tennis court. Then you add a swimming pool also. So it would really depend on the need and requirements of the community center or clubhouse that you are designing. So in our plate, I think the design character should be more on the Mediterranean direction. So the principal plant elements and relationships to each other are illustrated here in figure 17.1. So if you look at here, class, this is the bubble diagram for it. So if this is the entrance, it should have an access here. Then the entrance should have an access for a storage and for the toilets. Okay. Then for the community hall. Then for the different meeting rooms. Then what you should be careful about is that your kitchen, there should be access for it for deliveries. Okay. So the illustration here is wrong. So the access should be here at the entrance. Then the access for the deliveries should be in the kitchen. So that's the basic layout of it. Okay. So in the design problem that that we gave, uh, I hope that you're able to particularly orient your building to the different cardinal points, okay, north, south, east, and west. Then look into the best location for the different rooms based on the advantage if they're going to be placed on an eastern area or a western area. Okay. And also try to look into the existing flora in the site. As for your uh, project to be considered sustainable, you should try to adapt to the existing environment and integrate your building there as much as possible instead of reforming the entire site. Okay. So community centers are multi-purpose buildings. Needs and priorities often conflict. The skill of the designer in consultation with the client, statutory authorities, and specialists must be exercised so that a balance is struck. All of the following factors should be considered. So in our design plate class, I would expect that you have done your due diligence and research on the National Building Code, your PD 1096, BP 344, PD 957, and other relevant laws which influence and shape the subdivision and the clubhouse itself. Of course, you should look into the ratio of the parking, you should look into the minimum size requirements, and you should look into the functionalities of the spaces within. Okay, so most new build self-contained community centers are domestic in scale. The most economic forms of construction are those used in domestic buildings, solid ground floors, masonry load-bearing walls, and lightweight flat roofs or frame pitch roofs. So since uh, the design character specifically provided in our plate is Mediterranean, so I hope that you avoided the flat roof as much as possible. Alternative forms of constructions are only occasionally justified for a difficult site or when a short life building is required. In the latter case, it is worth considering proprietary off-the-peg buildings. The appearance of such a building is not always aesthetically pleasing, but there are exceptions, where the community facilities are to be accommodated in a larger building also used for other purposes. Structure and construction will be determined by wider considerations. So for self-contained community centers, it is worthwhile designing for minimum maintenance. If as upkeep funds are always limited. Okay, so when you design community centers, class, you should always consider to try to keep integrate and design that it should be it should function. The building should function less maintenance as much as possible. Um, because if it's a community center, especially in a subdivision, although there's a budget for it, don't expect that the budget is that big. So you could help your client by designing your clubhouse in such a way that you don't need much maintenance for it. Okay? You can do that by optimizing the spaces, by looking into the different materials that you're going to use for the project. Yes, I think this is an example, but this is more of a church than a community center. But I guess this is how they do this in the United States. So notice the ample space for storage, and notice there's also a kitchen here. Yeah, Church Center of St. James Church. Okay, there are several meeting rooms. So if they want to use this whole space, they just move the partition, or if they want to use the separate uh, spaces, they could just cover it here. There's a porch here. This is the different car parkings. So what's missing here in the kitchen is, I think, the storage. Because they should have a separate storage for the dry goods, etc. But I guess it would really depend also on the use of the space. So it's a case to case basis. So this is another church here. This is a community center, but it's a church. You could look at it. There's a kitchen. So I hope that your kitchen class, you design in such a way that it's not too far from your function halls or meeting rooms. Okay, and has sufficient storage for spaces for storage, and it should have a space for accepting delivery trucks. Okay, then don't forget also your uh, restrooms. Then always have a consideration for um, PWDs in your restroom designs. So you look at here. This is probably the PWD. Always include them class in your designs and make sure that you add ramps in your facilities. Okay, then let's talk about here. It says that materials and finishes for self-contained community centers is worthwhile designing for minimum maintenance. Then nature of use may dictate forms of construction and finish which are non-standard. For example, when regular provision for dancing or indoor sports as badminton or gymnastics is required, the door should provide some the floor should provide some resilience, and specialist advice should be sought. Okay, for durability, some uses, particularly sporting activities, can be exceptionally hard on surface finishes. The main hall may need to be equipped with retractable bleachers seating as used in sports centers and educational buildings. Pulling out and stacking back such seating creates localized loading and wear. Resilient floors are particularly vulnerable. The manufacturers of seating and of the floor finishes should be consulted at an early stage. But of course, this would really depend plus on the use of uh, the community center. It also depend on the client. So in our plate, I think we already provided separate areas for the sporting events. So safety users of a community center range from small children to elderly and disabled people. So I hope that you consider uh, these groups class when you design. So always think that there are a lot of small children who will be visiting your clubhouse. And of course, disabled people and also the elderly. So design your spaces in such a way that you accommodate them, that they are safe, and they feel comfortable in using the clubhouse. So cleaning, community facilities get heavy use and limited operating budgets. I guess it's also true here in the Philippines. So the building should be easy to clean. Okay? So these are the basic standards. I won't discuss them here because this some of the standards are quite different from PD 1096, but there might be some similarities. Okay, okay. For disabled people, I hope that you did research on BP 344. Then, yeah, let's look into this one, the means of escape. Look into the National Fire Code. I think it's revised in 2008. So just search for it and look for the specific provisions. Then for the noise, so community center is more likely to generate than to suffer from high noise levels. They're commonly used at night and at the weekend and are often situated in residential communities. So if you look at the lot plus that we're located in our community center, notice that it's adjacent to a residential area. Okay. So it's adjoining a residential area. I hope that you considered the people living on those lots as well. So they must therefore be designed to avoid nuisance where uses takes place simultaneously. Sound separation will be necessary between a noisy activity such as a dance and ones requiring relative quiet such as a lecture. So the basic principles of acoustics design should be applied, such as the orientation, location of entrances, exits, and windows relative to adjoining buildings, the layout, the shape of rooms, double glazing only available in association with mechanical ventilation, sound absorbent finishes, and landscaping including trees to contain external noise. So I guess some of this is already discussed in your theory of architecture as well. So I hope that you'll be able to implement them in the plate. So community centers for security. Community centers are more than usually vulnerable to break-ins and vandalism as they do not have resident caretakers or 24-hour surveillance. But in the case class of our plate, it's within a residential subdivision and has a guard house also. So usually if you look into some of the high-end subdivisions here in the city, uh, they place guards also in uh, the clubhouse. This is, but however, the concerns here, written here, it's quite true, especially if you're looking at community centers for the barangays or those that are not for exclusive or public purposes. Okay, so these are the elements of the plan. We have the entrance. So when you design the entrance, it should be large enough to accommodate an influx of people. So remember, class, these are only the basics. Okay. Large influx of people, such as prior to a meeting or concert. Signposting should be as clear as many will be unfamiliar with the building. Unless there is a separate goods entrance, it should allow for bulk delivery of food and drink, display material and equipment, consider arrangement of the doors, the durability of surfaces, and easy access to both the kitchen and the hall. Then you have the hall. So for sports purposes, so sometimes it could be for sports purposes, but in our plate, I think we have a separate area for them for the sports activities. A rectangular shape is likely to be suitable for a wider range of uses than a square or inner shape. If a blackout is required, pay special attention to size and location of windows. Mechanical ventilation may be needed. Then you have the meeting rooms. If more than one, make them different sizes. Alternately, have one space that can be divided using sliding folding doors. Although some of these do not provide adequate sound insulation, at least one meeting room should have direct access to the hall. They have the toilets. Separate toilets will be needed for men, women, and disabled people. There may be a need for smaller toilets for little children. Unisex baby changing facilities should be provided. If considerable sports use is expected, showers will be necessary for each sex. When you have a kitchen, should be a little need for more than domestic kitchen. If catered functions are expected, provide space for setting out and final preparations. So that's why I told you earlier, class, that the kitchen should have the different storage areas for the dry goods and other stuff. Okay, so research them on I think it's in the time saver standards. So you should have considerations for them. You should also have consideration for the delivery trucks as well, so that they just have to dock, then you get the materials and get inside the storage uh, areas as well. Then you subdivide your kitchen properly, zone them properly. Okay. Then you have a storage, so separate storage, of course, for the kitchen, for the sports, the seating, other furniture, the kindergarten, garden, and the scouts. The kitchen should be directly accessible from the kitchen. The others from the hall storage space should be as generous as space and budget will allow. Okay, so there's a something wrong here with the statement. Okay, so the kitchen class should be directly accessible as much as possible from the dining areas or the function halls. So make sure that they are not too far away uh, for the purpose of functionality. Okay, so these are just the basic spaces. In our plate, it's much more complex than this. So I hope that you've already rehearsed and uh, already prepared for our oral presentation. Um, this coming October, I think it's coming October 20. So present your design well, then be ready to receive some advices on your plans, but don't take the advices class in a bad manner because uh, the advices for your design, the critiquing for it, it's for your own benefit so that you can further improve your design process. So it's part of the design process. Okay, so no design is perfect from the start because you need the input from the users and you need to collaborate with others as well in order to come up with something that is with a design that is quite good. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our first blade, especially the design process that it took to achieve your solution. Okay. So as long as you base it on functionality, as long as you base it on the local codes or the national building code, PD 1096, BP 344, uh, the other laws, I think you'll be doing fine in this subject. Okay. And if there are some things that you need to enhance, take it as a challenge. Okay. So yeah, so this ends my lecture for community centers. If you have any further questions or clarifications, class, feel free to reach me anytime, as long as I'm online, okay? But don't just don't message. Is if it's late at night, probably I'm sleeping already. If it's 12 midnight, you're going to send a message. Okay, so stay safe, class, and um, see you next meeting.